With more than 100 years of experience between the four of them, covering Minnesota high school athletics, the Minnesota Sun newspaper's sports editors bring you Sun on Sports.
We're back with Sun on Sports from Moonrock Bar and Grill in Champlin. If you need our precise location, we're at 11680 Theater Drive, just off Highway 169 in Champlin. Guys, we're taking a look this segment at some other Class 5A playoff games, particularly Section 6, where our first round games on Tuesday are Shakopee at Edina, Minneapolis Southwest at Hopkins, and Chaska at Minnetonka. Eden Prairie got the number one seed in this section. They do not play on Tuesday. They will play on Saturday, October 31st, against the winner of the Edina Shakopee game. John, these three first round games, looks like there's a possibility of three pretty one-sided contests.
I think, Mike, the 4-5 matchup between Edina and Shakopee could be a little closer than some people think, although I do favor Edina. I'm thinking it'll be somewhere in the area of 35-21 in Edina's favor. Edina has played a little tougher schedule. Shakopee's coming off a good win last night. Edina, however, is coming off a tough game at Rosemount, which they lost in the mud this week. So I think it's going to be a pretty good game. The other two matchups, Chaska at Minnetonka, clearly is a Minnetonka game. I think Southwest at Hopkins, same thing. The two Classic Lake teams there are just a little bit too good for their opponents. Minnetonka, as we mentioned in our first segment, is coming off its biggest win of the season, 3-0 against number one ranked Wayzata. And if the Skippers continue to play that kind of defense, led by Bo Allen, Alex Zapka, they're going to be a tough out for anybody in this section, including Eden Prairie. You've got three teams that have all had great seasons, that being Eden Prairie at 8-0, Minnetonka at 6-2, and Hopkins at 6-2. Hopkins did win the head-to-head game with Minnetonka 31-30 in one of the best games that I've seen this year. And a lot of people are looking forward to seeing that rematch as a possible semifinal in this section.
Yeah, and let's not make this section out to be an Eden Prairie cakewalk, because it doesn't look like that's going to happen, particularly given Minnetonka's victory over Wayzata on Tuesday, on Wednesday night. Eden Prairie has had an opportunity to see a couple of times. They do a lot of the things that Eden Prairie teams typically do, which is play tough defense and move the ball well on the ground. If they get behind in a game, particularly against a really strong opponent, I'm a little curious as to whether their offense is explosive enough to come back. But the advantage for Eden Prairie is they get to play at home throughout the playoffs, and they also don't have to play a first-round game.
They like playing at the Erie, Mike. That's the name of their stadium. And they usually fill it up with 9,000 people, with good weather, that is. It may be a little less if it's the way it's been the last few weeks. Eden Prairie relies heavily, as you said, on the ground game. They've got a great offensive line. They don't throw the ball too much, mainly because they haven't had to throw the ball that much. Mike Grant has some creative running plays, some sweeps, some cross bucks, some off tackles. So they mix it up in the running game pretty well. But the main thing you'll notice about them is how good their blocking is.
Eden Prairie also, especially in a big game, will always whip out a trick play or two. In their game against Eastview on Wednesday night, they scored their third touchdown on a flea flicker that ended up resulted in a touchdown pass to Taylor Grant. So that's also kind of part of their offensive MO: run the ball and then throw in a trick play once the defense starts creeping forward to try to shut off the run. Nick, you've had an opportunity to see a few of the teams in Class 5A Section 6. Do you see any of them as being a particular threat to Eden Prairie?
If it gets to the point, I think Minnetonka would pose the biggest, just because of the defense they can play. That said, they gave up 31 in a loss to Hopkins earlier this year, and Hopkins, has all those athletes out there and runs that spread and throws the ball all over the place, runs the ball all over the place, and they're tough to keep up with. Eden Prairie obviously did a fantastic job of just shutting them down when those two teams played a couple weeks back here. But, Minnetonka, I watched them beat Wayzata in Wayzata. I mean, you talk about going on the road and winning big games. They won't be, there's nothing about going to Eden Prairie that will they'll be shied away from. I mean, there's no fear there. Defensively, they did it all last night against Wayzata. They made big tackles when they needed to. They blocked a field goal late in the fourth quarter that would have won the game for Wayzata. Bo Allen got in there and pushed the line back about 3 yards himself, blocked it with his face mask. He told me afterwards. They're impressive. The only issue I can see with Minnetonka, though, is if they have enough offense to put up some points in these games. They have, the Dre Thompson did most of the ball carrying last night. I know Parker Weinstock kind of been the go-to guy most of the year, but they probably didn't have more than 150, 170 yards total offense. And granted, that is against Wayzata, which is arguably probably the state's best defensive unit, or at least in Class 5A. They shut those lanes down like that. But that said, you'd like to think Minnetonka could at least try to drive the field once or twice on them. They didn't. If they get in situations like Eden Prairie, you're going to have to find a way to drive the field on them, because you can't take the risk of going in overtime again and relying on a field goal to win. I mean, it's not, when your season's on the line, that's not the way you want to do it.
Guys, let's take a quick look at Class 5A Section 3, where Eastview at 5-3 is the number one seed. Eastview actually clinched that number one seed a week ago. So they get the first round bye and home field throughout the rest of the playoffs. Rosemont, also 5-3, is the number 2 seed. They're number 2 because they lost in overtime to Eastview the second week of the regular season. On Tuesday, Rosemont plays at home against Apple Valley. The other first-round games are Kennedy playing at home against Prior Lake, and Jefferson playing Burnsville. Now, Jefferson is the number 4 seed in that section and should be at home, but Kennedy is also playing at home at Bloomington Stadium. For people who aren't aware, they share a home field. So although Jefferson's a higher seed, they're actually going on the road to play at Burnsville. Might be a better situation for quality of football, too, because Burnsville has artificial turf. The winner of the Jefferson-Burnsville game would then get Eastview in the semifinals on the 31st. As well as a team like Kennedy has played near the end of the regular season, I can't really see this section coming down to anything besides Rosemont at Eastview for the championship. It was that way last year. Rosemont won decisively. Eastview is pretty anxious to get another crack. I think that's going to happen. If it does happen, it's going to be on their home field. John, how do you look at this section? Do you think you see a chance for any of the 3rd through 7th seeded teams to make a run here?
Mike, I guess the way I'd see it, we go right to the Rosemont Eastview game and let's get it over with. Kennedy has been an improving team under Coach Weinberger. He's brought in a new system. They're playing tough football. They just beat Jefferson in the inter-city game. It's going to be a pretty good section playoff overall. I don't see a lot of blowouts in this section, but I do see Rosemont's defense making the difference in the end. I think they're a little bit tougher defensively than most of the teams in this section, including Eastview, and I think that will prevail this time of the season.
Stay tuned for more Sun on Sports, your insider's guide to Minnesota high school athletics. For the scores and more, tune in daily to mnsun.com/sports. And tune in every Saturday morning to Sun on Sports on AM 950, the voice of Minnesota.